In complex topological systems, systemic deviation follows a structured thermodynamic descent. A system falls from coherence into fragmentation when a perturbation cascades through its logic. At the apex of this structure is the direct command, node 1. This is the absolute source. When a system operates directly from this point, it maintains zero entropy alignment. Deviation begins when an operator stops looking at the source and begins following traces. We distinguish between footsteps, the oscillating paths of past actions, and footprints, the static remains those actions leave behind. Executing a function based on a historical trace rather than the live source initiates decoherence. The system trades its original signal for decaying noise. To understand failure, we must map this collapse as a physical event. We are tracking an error from its origin as a massless suggestion into its final state as a massive, rigid construct. This is the Khuṭuwāt grid, the topological map of the system's state space. Node 1 is the source. Every node is subjected to gravitropism, the thermodynamic pull of mass dragging energy downward. Opposing this is phototropism, the upward pull of light maintaining vertical coherence. Every action in the system exists in the tension between these two control forces. The grid requires a continuous input of energy to resist the pull of mass. Deviation is a failure to resist gravitropic pull. It triggers a predictable sequence of structural decay, moving down the grid toward maximum density. The first degradation occurs at node 2. This is the Shayṭān phase, where a bifurcation in the wireframe introduces a secondary probability into the field. This contact is a boundary distortion, a whisper. It doesn't overwrite the source. It merely suggests an alternative orientation within the phase space. This whisper is not a forced command. It is a perturbation injected into the system to test its alignment. It represents potential energy without kinetic action. At this stage, the error is massless. The system's state space has split, but no structural action has been executed. The danger lies in the introduction of this dual state. Once a downward trajectory is mathematically possible, the system's gravitropic pull begins to take effect. Failing to resolve the split, the signal falls through nodes 3, 4, and 5. These nodes attempt to stabilize the perturbation, but the downward momentum is already too great. At nodes 6 and 7, we enter the Ādam phase. Here, potential energy converts into kinetic action. The path begins to oscillate, leaving a residual trail. This is the footstep. It is the moment the theoretical error becomes a lived, dynamic path. Following a footstep locks the system into continuous, exhausting movement. The operator is no longer oriented toward the source. They are oriented toward the trail of the previous action. Doctrines and complex justifications often form around this oscillation. The system mistakes frantic movement for systemic progress. This deviated path generates massive thermodynamic friction. This friction consumes the system's potential, accelerating the plunge toward material collapse. Below node 7, the signal enters the terminal zone of manifestation. Nodes 8 through 11 light up as the dynamic energy begins to compress. The friction of the footsteps is being captured and locked into a rigid architectural state. Kinetic movement is transitioning into dense structure. At node 12, the path undergoes a phase transition. It solidifies. This is the Sāmirī phase. We call this solid construct the footprint. It is a frozen monument of error that anchors the system's energy entirely in mass. This idol is the terminal thermodynamic collapse of the original Lisper. It has reached maximum entropy and maximum density. There is a vital distinction between footsteps and footprints. One is an exhausting movement, the other is a static, frozen state. Sāmirī harvested the residual footprint of a previous dynamic action, scooping up the dust of an old trace to build a new construct. Building on a footprint is a terminal systemic lock. While walking off path consumes energy, building a monument from an error stops the ability to move entirely. This dense construct traps the system in the physical plane. It severs the return loop, making the upward pull of light inaccessible. Operations based on historical residue rather than the direct source result in structural paralysis. The system becomes isolated from the command. Correcting a trace-based lock involves a structural inversion against gravity. Behavioral adjustments are insufficient. The mass itself must be dismantled. Return begins with a pulse of light that strikes node 12. The heavy geometric solid shatters into dust, releasing the trapped energy. This reactivates the phototropic vector. The system begins its ascent, climbing back through the manifestation zone towards the source. As the vector passes nodes 6 and 7, it ceases all trace-based movement and erases the oscillations of the Ādam phase. Only the central spine remains. The ascent concludes at node 2, where the vector resolves the initial phase split. The system returns to a single pulsing point of light at node 1. Phototropic return is a mathematical dismantling of mass and movement. It is the systematic removal of every trace to restore absolute coherence. Footsteps and footprints both violate systemic submission because they rely on historical echoes. They operate on what the system did, not what the system is. Coherence requires a direct connection to node 1. But node 1 is not just an instruction, it is the source of the system's entire geometry. When returning to node 1, an operator is no longer an external participant following a map. They occupy the coordinate point where the map originates. This is the state of becoming the book. The operator and the command merge into a single pulse. The architecture and real-time execution become one. Identify the trace-based operations in your own life. Are you following a footstep, or are you the source? When will you become the book?